Now we are finally at what I would call the meat and potatoes of doing your own bookkeeping. So this would be what I refer to as categorizing your transactions, or maybe your tax advisor says coding the bank feed. But the basic idea is taking all of the transactions that are coming into QBO from your bank account and deciding where they go. Number one, are they a business related transaction? And number two, what category do they fall under? Are they a meal? Are they office supplies? Are they a purchase of inventory? So all of those items are reported differently to the IRS. So it's easier if we categorize them in that same manner. And then also this provides additional feedback about your business's operations, because you can see that maybe your meals with clients is relatively high, so that cost of customer acquisition is going to increase, or maybe you need to add an additional budget for the project to account for those operating costs. So to get to that section on the left-hand side, we will navigate to bookkeeping and then make sure we've selected transactions. Now we will see our banks appear. Best practice is to click the update button before you get started. QuickBooks normally updates pretty frequently, but it's not impossible for some of the banks to suddenly have transactions appear. So it always is a little bit annoying and defeating when you've gone through maybe a few hundred transactions and then suddenly even more appear. So I like to always click that update button first, just to make sure that I really am looking at all of the available transactions. This may not be able to bring in every single piece of information, just because it takes the bank a few days to process the information. So for example, if I went to lunch with a client today, it probably wouldn't show up on my QBO account immediately, because the bank still needs to verify and process that charge. But once that process has been completed, then I would be able to click that update button, or when I log in, it would already be available for me to take a look at. So categorizing. The most important feature of this is making sure that you select either a vendor or a customer, depending on whether it's money that you spent or money that you receive. Money that's spent should always have a vendor attached to it, and any money that's received should have a customer. The next piece of information would be the category. So this is what I purchased. So we have the who with the vendor and the customer, and now we need the what. So in this case, this is Google. I do want you to keep in mind that some of the categories will depend on your particular tax advisor and their instructions based on the needs of your business. But just for some basic examples, we have that category. We also have the ability to add in a memo. Maybe we can say email account. This memo is not required, but for some transactions that are maybe out of the ordinary, it can be easier to add that memo in, just so that you're not losing any information when you go to your tax advisor or maybe a business planner and they ask you questions about something that happened 6 months ago. Your memory might not be as fresh in that particular moment. And then you also have the ability to add an attachment. This is also not required, but I suggest that it is good practice to do that, especially for items that are out of the ordinary. So if you went out and you spent $10,000 on a piece of equipment, maybe having the attachment there would be helpful. Again, next year or maybe a few years down the road, just in case. When I'm done, I can click the add button and then I continue. As I go through, QuickBooks will try to make my life a little bit easier, and it will make suggestions. Some of these suggestions are not always going to be correct. So you do want to be very, very careful that you are still reviewing the suggestions that it provided. But in this case, it saw that I had a transaction from Google, and I chose the category dues and subscriptions last time, so it's going to automatically suggest that I use that same dues and subscriptions again. In some cases, that's going to be correct, but in others, for example, Amazon, you can purchase multiple types of products. Maybe some are actual supplies, maybe you have some office supplies, or maybe you even got some food from Amazon. So that would be an example of a vendor that could have multiple categories. What you need to do is go through and review every single transaction. If a transaction is not business related, for example, I have Shell. They're not currently a vendor, so I'm going to add them as a vendor. Click the Save button. I am going to allocate it to the equity section. This is going to be considered, in my case, a distribution. It might be listed as owner's pay and expenses, or maybe your tax advisor has a special account that you can use for your personal items. It's really important to note that if your transaction is personal, it still does need to be accounted for, because if we deleted it or excluded it, our bank account balance would no longer match the actual account balance, which can create problems in the long run. So even if an item isn't business related, we want to talk to our tax advisor and confirm the account they would like us to categorize those items to. This process is generally a fairly simple process. You may need to reach out to your tax advisor for guidance on where they would like certain vendors and expenditures categorized to, but for the most part, after a couple of tries, I'm sure you will be doing great. So I hope you have fun with this section. It is definitely where we spend the most amount of our time, but it is very, very important that we select the correct categories for each item, not only for your tax advisor, but also so you know where your money is spent and how to make the best business decisions moving forward.